We've spent 4 talks talking about what goes wrong: injury, death, inflammation. Today, we flip the script and talk about what the body does to fix things. Tissue repair is one of the most remarkable processes in biology. It's the reason a laceration closes, a bone knits together, and a pneumonia resolves without leaving a permanent hole in the lung. But repair isn't perfect, and the gap between ideal regeneration and imperfect scarring has profound clinical consequences. Understanding the logic of repair will help you predict how a wound will heal, why some heal poorly, and what you can do about it. Foundational concept for this entire talk. When tissue is damaged, the body essentially has to make a choice. Can I replace what was lost with the same thing, or do I have to patch it with something generic? The first option is regeneration, perfect restoration. The second is repair, functional patching with scar tissue. Which one happens depends on 3 things. 1, whether the remaining cells can divide and replace lost neighbors. 2, whether the structural scaffold of the tissue is still intact to guide rebuilding. And 3, how much was lost. A small hepatic insult? Regeneration. Massive liver necrosis that destroys both cells and scaffold? Fibrosis. Understanding this logic lets you predict outcomes. The most important variable in predicting whether tissue will regenerate or scar is whether the injured cells can divide. We classify cells into 3 categories based on this. Labile cells are constantly dividing throughout life: skin epithelium, the intestinal lining, bone marrow cells. These tissues regenerate beautifully because there's always a pool of dividing cells ready to replace what's lost. Stable cells, like hepatocytes and renal tubular cells, are normally quiet, not dividing, but injure them and they can re-enter the cell cycle and regenerate. This is why the liver has such a remarkable regenerative capacity. Permanent cells, neurons, cardiac myocytes, lost their ability to divide early in development. If a cardiac myocyte dies, it is never replaced. A scar forms instead. Wound healing is often taught as 4 sequential steps, but in reality, these phases heavily overlap, which is why interrupting any one of them affects all the others. First, hemostasis. Within seconds of injury, platelets aggregate and a fibrin clot forms. That clot isn't just stopping bleeding, it's creating the provisional scaffold that guides the next phase. Then inflammation. Neutrophils arrive and debride the wound, followed by macrophages that take over and begin orchestrating repair. Then the proliferative phase. This is where the real rebuilding happens. New blood vessels grow in, fibroblasts arrive and lay collagen, and epithelial cells migrate across the wound surface. Finally, remodeling. The initial collagen is disorganized and weak. Over weeks to months, it gets reorganized into stronger cross-linked bundles, and myofibroblasts contract the wound. Granulation tissue is one of those terms that trip students up, essentially because granuloma sounds similar, but it's completely different. Granulation tissue is the temporary biological scaffolding that fills a wound while permanent repair is being organized. Grossly, it looks beefy red, moist, and slightly granular. That granular appearance comes from the loops of new capillaries just under the surface. It bleeds easily on contact. The macrophages are the conductors here. They're releasing VEGF, which drives angiogenesis, and PDGF and TGF-beta, which recruit and activate fibroblasts. Healthy granulation tissue is a good sign. Pale, flat, non-bleeding granulation tissue tells you the healing process is stalled. The way a wound heals is heavily influenced by its geometry. A clean surgical incision where the edges are sutured together heals by primary intention. The gap is tiny, very little granulation tissue is needed, and the result is a thin, neat scar. That's the ideal. An open wound, an avulsion, a bite wound left to drain, a large skin defect has to heal by secondary intention. Granulation tissue has to fill the entire defect from the bottom up. Myofibroblasts have to contract the wound edges toward each other, and epithelial cells have to migrate across the entire granulation tissue surface. This takes much longer, produces more scar, and in horses carries a specific risk of exuberant granulation tissue, what we call proud flesh, where granulation tissue overgrows beyond the wound margin and actually impedes epithelialization. Contraction is a remarkable mechanical process. Myofibroblasts, cells that are part fibroblast, part smooth muscle, populate the granulation tissue and literally pull the wound edges toward each other using contractile force generated by actin filaments. This can reduce wound area by 40 to 80% in some wounds, dramatically reducing the amount of epithelium that needs to migrate across the surface. But, like many biological processes, too much of a good thing becomes a problem. Excessive myofibroblast activity around a joint produces a contracture. The wound closes, but now the scar is pulling the joint into an abnormal position, limiting range of motion. In the horse's distal limb, where there's very little soft tissue and myofibroblast populations are reduced, contraction is insufficient, granulation tissue overgrows the wound margin, and proud flesh forms. Healing doesn't fail randomly. It fails when one or more of the biological requirements aren't being met. Think of this as a checklist you can run through for any patient with a non-healing wound. Is the wound infected? Bacteria and their proteases destroy the collagen that fibroblasts are trying to lay down. You're building and demolishing simultaneously. Is the tissue perfused? Angiogenesis and fibroblast function require oxygen. Is the patient adequately nourished? Collagen synthesis requires amino acids, particularly proline and glycine. Is there a foreign body? That's a guaranteed source of sustained inflammation. Is the patient on corticosteroids? Steroids suppress both the inflammatory phase and the proliferative phase. Running this mental checklist on every non-healing wound will identify the correctable cause. Bone healing is a beautiful example of how repair principles apply to a highly specialized tissue. The fracture hematoma forms immediately and is not just a nuisance, it's the provisional scaffold, exactly like the fibrin clot in a skin wound. Then, a soft callus of fibrocartilage bridges the fracture gap. Osteoblasts need stability before they can function, and the cartilage provides that stability while bone production ramps up. The hard callus phase replaces that cartilage with woven bone, disorganized but strong enough to restore structural integrity. And finally, over months to years, remodeling converts woven bone into organized lamellar bone along the lines of mechanical stress. The requirements for bone healing mirror wound healing generally: stability, blood supply to both ends, and viable bone cells. Key ideas from today. If I had to pick the two most clinically important, they'd be this. First, permanent cells don't regenerate, so injuries to the heart, brain, and spinal cord have permanent functional consequences, and preventing those injuries is far more important than treating them. And second, non-healing wounds are always failing for a reason. Your job as a clinician is to identify and correct that reason, not just redress the wound. Next talk, we shift to something a little different: the pathological accumulation of pigments, minerals, and metabolic products inside cells and tissues. Pause the video, read the scenario, give it a try, and we'll work it together. Day 7 falls squarely in the proliferative phase of healing. The inflammatory phase has largely wound down. Right now, macrophages have shifted from a pro-inflammatory phenotype to a pro-repair phenotype. They're releasing PDGF and TGF-beta that drive fibroblast recruitment and activation. Fibroblasts are actively synthesizing type 3 collagen, the immature flexible form, and depositing it into the wound space. Angiogenesis is occurring with new capillary loops growing in from the wound margins. On the surface, epithelial cells have migrated across the wound gap and restored surface continuity within the first 24 or 48 hours in a sutured wound. By day 7 in a primary intention wound, the wound has perhaps 25 to 30% of its final tensile strength. Remodeling the conversion of type 3 to type 1 collagen won't complete for weeks to months. Pause the video, read this scenario, give it a try, and we'll work it together. This is exuberant granulation tissue, proud flesh. It forms on the distal limb of horses because this region has a very low density of myofibroblasts relative to proximal body locations. Without adequate myofibroblast-driven wound contraction, the granulation tissue that fills the wound continues to proliferate past the wound margin, eventually protruding above the skin surface. Once it protrudes above the skin level, epithelial cells, which migrate along a flat gradient and cannot migrate uphill, can no longer resurface the wound. Management involves surgical debridement or chemical cauterization to reduce the granulation tissue to skin level, followed by pressure bandaging to inhibit regrowth, and in some cases, topical corticosteroids to reduce the proliferative stimulus. The video, read the scenario, give it a go, and we'll go through it together. Diabetes impairs wound healing through multiple simultaneous mechanisms. First, hyperglycemia impairs neutrophil function. Chemotaxis, phagocytosis, and oxidative burst are all blunted, so bacterial clearance is inadequate and infection persists. Second, advanced glycation end products, AGEs, accumulate in vessel walls, causing microvascular disease and reducing tissue perfusion. Hypoxic tissue cannot support angiogenesis or fibroblast collagen synthesis. Third, peripheral neuropathy, particularly in cats, impairs the sensation-driven protective behaviors that prevent ongoing wound trauma. Fourth, hyperglycemia itself impairs fibroblast proliferation and collagen cross-linking, producing structurally weaker scar tissue. This patient needs glycemic stabilization alongside wound management.